Hi, I am Alfonso, High Energy Muchacho, and today I'm going to talk about my 5 most used effects for processing basslines. So these aren't any specific plugins, although I will show some examples. This is more focused on the type of effect that I use. Again, EQ does not count. It should go without saying that the number one most used effect on everything is EQ. If you ain't EQing, what are you doing? Anyway, let's dive right into number 5, which is overdrive. So I've mentioned this before. Overdrive, distortion, saturation, whatever you want to call it, is essential for bringing volume and life out of sounds. And it can really make a big difference on bass sounds as well. It can be used as an effect on an individual sound to make it seem more aggressive, such as this. It can also be used across a group of bass sounds to make them jump out in the mix. A lot of the time when you're dealing with really deep bass lines, they can lack a lot of mid-range harmonic content, and as such, when you play your track back through smaller speakers, you lose the sound. It's just not produced by the smaller speakers. Dropping some subtle overdrive across your bass lines can bring out the mid-range frequencies and allow people to hear your wonderful work, even when they're listening on a $5 stereo in the shower. Okay, next up is chorus. I've mentioned before that chorus is a great way to make mono synth sounds into stereo synth sounds. I almost use it always exclusively on a send so that I can blend it in with a mono signal rather than dropping the effect on the bass line itself and then being left with this wobbling, modulating effect that can sometimes be a bit too unfocused. Listen as I crank up the chorus on this simple bass line. Pay particular attention to how wide and loud this sound becomes. It's something to have in your arsenal, but don't overuse it. Although it can add a lot of width, it can also cause your bass lines to sound less tight and defined overall. So I'm cheating with the next one, as it's not really an effect, but more of a processing technique, and that technique is using groups. So groups within Ableton Live are one of my favourite features. You can of course replicate these by sending all your bass channels to a bus, which is essentially the same thing. My reasoning behind using groups so much is that I like to have multiple sounds playing as one bass line. So I might have a saw bass coupled with a pitch tom in a rhythm that complements the kick drum. My goal is to always have them sounding as one, so you're not conscious that they're different sounds, but you subconsciously know that they have different properties, i.e. one is more smooth and sustained, whilst the other has a harsher attack and sounds more punchy. So I usually process them individually, but it's the group processing that really brings them together. I usually run all the bass sounds through either the glue compressor or the API one from Waves. This will then often be fed into the Waves L2 limiter. Take a listen to the impact that the group processing has on the cohesion of this bass line. Try to ignore the extra volume as much as possible and concentrate on the character of the sounds. Next up is delay. So I've mentioned in previous videos that you shouldn't be scared to use effects like reverb and delay on bass lines. They can really add some complexity and width to your sounds. As long as you try to limit the amount of really low frequencies getting bounced around by your delay, you should be fine. The easiest way to do this is to send your bassline to a return channel and drop a delay with an EQ after it. This gives you control over how much you want to blend in with the rest of your track. On the right kind of bassline, this can sound incredible. Short and punchy ones work best. Take a listen. Okay, so my number one most used and indeed most useful technique for processing basslines is limiting. It's an open secret, but the secret to fat basslines is often limiting. Bass frequencies respond very well to limiting, as they tend to have a lot of energy and quite often they will benefit from some heavy processing. This can work well on punchy synth sounds and percussive ones too, but where it really shines for me is in long sustained notes. Listen to the change in character of this sound as I apply limiting. The control that limiting gives you over a very powerful and sustained sound like this is incredibly valuable. By its nature, it's shifting around a lot and changing volume as well. Limiting really helps to tame the bass frequencies and prevent them from overpowering your mix. When you're aiming for all your bass notes and sounds to hit with the same power, limiting really is the only game in town. I wanted to quickly address one thing that I get asked a lot, and that's how to balance and blend your kick and bass line together. I think what people struggle with most here is the inability to always hear everything that's going on down in the lowest frequencies. This is probably due to inadequate monitoring. There are ways to visualize this using analyzers, but you really should be using reference tracks as your first step when trying to judge this. I could probably do an hour-long video on how to get the balance right, but I think it's important to really focus on the sounds that you're using. You should build the kick and bass line together at the same time. If you've spent hours trying to get them to complement each other, then it's highly likely that they're not meant to work together at all. Sometimes you just need to take the hint and change something. If it's going to work, it's probably going to work quickly. A lot of the time, people neglect their note lengths when creating bass lines. You need to pay particular attention to not only the attack of your sounds, but also how they end. Long release times generally take a lot more work to get right than shorter ones. You might want to ensure that your bass note has finished playing before the next kick comes in. This is a particular problem for people using presets, as you'll audition a sound, fall in love with it, but give no thought as to its decay or release envelope. It's these little details that can really take your productions to the next level. So, Muchacho hopes you found this useful. Let me know down in the comments if I missed anything out.